Matt Sharp from the Alliance Defending Freedom is here with us because while they're not making major legal advancements in the country, they're also advising, analyzing, and giving us kind of the lowdown on some of the most important pieces of legislation to hit the country. And in this case, that'd be what? Senator Marshall, isn't it? His new act on biological sex. So I'd like to give you just the floor. Take it away.
Yeah, this is the Defining Male and Female Act. It ought to be something that's not even necessary. But in this world that we live in, where what it means to be male and female is being erased, when men are demanding the right to go into females' locker rooms, restrooms, to play on women's sports teams, where kids are being told to reject their biological sex and instead replace it with drugs and surgeries that, push them towards these irreversible damage, we need to return to common sense. And so that's what Senator Marshall is doing with this bill, is just saying under federal law, we're going to recognize that male and female means what any person knows that they mean, that it's based on your genetics, your chromosomes, those undeniable factors that make a difference in physical differences, sports differences, all of those things, and just putting those into federal law. Again, this shouldn't be necessary, but because we've seen the radical left push this gender ideology in schools and medicine and in so many places, we need bills like this to restore sanity, to restore common sense, and to make clear when we talk about male and female, when we talk about sex in federal law, we're talking about those differences that each of us are born with based on our biology and that matter in these intimate spaces, that matter in sports, that matter in so many areas of life.
So you're talking about things that matter in these different areas of life regarding this piece of legislation from federal law. Laws are meant to prevent damages because when you file a lawsuit, that's what you are seeking retribution, you're seeking recompense for. I have suffered damages. These need to be paid back to me. So what damages specifically is this law seeking to prevent from ever taking place at all?
Well, I think you look at, let's take the Title IX example. We saw under the Biden-Harris administration, they were erasing sex in Title IX. They were erasing what it means to be male and female. And the damages.
What do you mean by erasing sex in Title IX? Just for some of us who may not have been around to watch that episode.
Yeah. So Title IX, passed decades ago, was meant to make sure that there is not discrimination based on sex in education. There was instances where young women were being denied the ability to enroll in colleges or pursue certain degrees or to have equal access to sports or dorms or things like that. So Congress stepped in and said, we want to make sure that women are not being discriminated against, that women are getting the same opportunities as men when it comes to education and other opportunities like that. Unfortunately, the Biden-Harris administration said, oh no, when Congress passed that decades ago, it didn't mean sex and the differences between male and female. What they really meant was gender identity. And so therefore, you have to allow the man that thinks he's a woman to be on the women's sports team, to be in the women's dorm. And what that's doing, it's taking away the very opportunities that Title IX was meant to preserve and to protect. You now have instances where rather than women's sports team being preserved for women, rather than women winning championships and winning medals, it's a guy coming in and taking away that opportunity from that young woman. So that's what Title IX was meant to stop. And now the Biden-Harris administration was trying to erase it.
So there's damage number one, right? You have individuals who are coming into a protected space and are taking the opportunities, the monetary gain, the future opportunities from these young women in sports. But there are, of course, other more dangerous damages. And I don't mean more dangerous as in that the things that we've listed already are not important. Of course they are. But when we look at situations like in Loudoun County, Virginia, in which, someone who just said, oh, I'm a girl, went into a girl's locker room and committed some very, very gross acts against young women. These are some damages. And again, that's one of dozens. We haven't even started talking about the carcinogenic hormonal treatments that you have to warn an adult woman going through menopause if you give her these exact same hormones. Hey, you're going to be at 5 times the risk of cancer. We don't have to warn the 14-year-old. I mean, it is wild that we need a federal statute to kind of set these rules in stone. This should never have been a rule that needed to be written in the first place. It's bewildering to any person outside of this kind of neoliberal, modern Western culture where people are worried about such trivial goose hunts.
Yeah, it's so true. When you walk into a gym, you see the women's locker room and the men's locker room. And we all know that you and I, Tony, we don't belong in the women's locker room. But unfortunately, there's so many people that say, no, Matt and Tony, if that's what you feel you are, you go right in there. Well, that's dangerous for women. That's dangerous for young girls. And that is wrong. And that's why we do need laws like this to define and say, when we say women's locker room, it doesn't mean you and I, Tony. It means someone that is biologically a woman. That is the only person that belongs in there.
Now, I've got a little bit of a compromise here. We can have 3 locker rooms. We can have the women's locker room, we can have the men's locker room, and then we can have a locker room for the old guys that like stand in there naked and read the paper while I'm just trying to change. And they're like doing the Captain Morgan pose and stuff. It's like, I don't want to. Nobody wants to see that either. So there can be 3 locker rooms because I also would like to not be creeped out in the locker room as well. That isn't exactly pertinent to this bill. I just think that since we're talking about it, that's something that also needs to be addressed. Maybe not by a federal statute, but a YMCA, if you're listening, it's time to innovate.
That's right. Though that example highlights it. Imagine, you and I, we don't like to see that. And that makes even us uncomfortable. Imagine that guy now saying, I'm a woman. I want to do that in the women's locker room. You mean what that does to women that are in there? You
mean like what guys who look just like that say in order to get into women's prisons, and especially in places like the state of California?
Exactly right. And you talk about the real harm, the stories that are coming out of California when they ignored what it means to be male and female. And when the women's prison now becomes a place where men can go, the stories of these women being assaulted, bullied, harassed, the stories of so much terrible things happening. And this is what this ideology pushes. And it's what makes laws like what Senator Marshall is introducing necessary to restore sanity and to make sure that no woman is assaulted, harmed, abused, harassed, or has her privacy rights violated by these dangerous policies.
Now, let's talk about the provisional argument between state and federal power coming into play here, because right now, concurrently, there are a lot on the right that are suggesting that, for example, the abortion and pro-life debate needs to happen at the state level, right? And so I have heard in response from individuals, pundits, legal experts over on the left, if you want to call them experts, that why isn't this just a state issue? If California wants to do its, super Trans Am, thank you, ma'am, kind of legal policy, then they should be able to. Why does the federal law need to step in this particular case where maybe it doesn't need to in abortion or pro-life case at the moment?
Well, you think of how widespread the federal government's tentacles are in so many areas of life. All of the Title IX madness, the things that are happening at our local schools, the things that are happening on our local sports teams are because of these federal policies that are saying men can be in women's spaces, can be in women's locker rooms, restrooms, and sports teams.
So the Fed's already there.
That's right, exactly. And so when the Fed's already there, we need federal solutions. That being said, there are states that are stepping up. We've seen places like Montana and others that have passed legislation like this at the state level to make sure that their state prisons, their state-run institutions are not dangerous places for women and are not places where women's privacy is lost. Now we need a federal solution to make sure that no matter where you are, no matter what school you attend, you don't have to worry about this gender ideology madness coming in and harming your daughters and granddaughters.
I've said this before because so many people have got this weird idea that this is some kind of age-old struggle in the United States, when realistically it's not. And I was having a conversation with a friend of mine who is a left-wing teacher and out of Des Moines. And she pointed out, at least her argument, that, well, we used to just allow people to do whatever they want. Everything like that there was this kind of magical progressivism in the Bill Clintonian era. And I pointed out that in Mrs. Doubtfire, that there was a man who cross-dressed and went into women's restrooms in San Francisco, and that the judge took his kids away from him in San Francisco. That would never happen now. They'd probably give him a medal. And like, my goodness. So I just kind of maybe a weird example, one might say, but this is not some goofball. I mean, this is not some tried and true battle that's been happening for ages. It's a recent thing. It's embarrassing that we have to pass these kind of laws. Do you think it actually has a chance of making its way to the president's desk?
Yeah, we hope so. This ought to be something that should be nonpartisan, that should unite the right and the left to say that no woman should be hurt by policies that allow men to go into their intimate spaces. So we would like to see that. We know this is something that President Trump during the campaign talked a lot about the need to push back against this gender ideology and to make sure that women's spaces, women's opportunities are preserved. So we'd love to see it make it to his desk and see Congress unite around this unified effort, just like it did when it passed Title IX. Let's unite around this to make sure that those laws like Title IX are doing what they meant to and preserving those opportunities for women.
Well said. Well said. Matt Sharp, Senior Counsel over at the Alliance Defending Freedom. Of course, we'll make sure all of that's linked down in the description as well. Matt, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, as always.
We'll have a little more to chat with your team about here pretty soon. My team's looking over some of the details on a case a little closer to home, but a tease will just have to do for now. We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal.